Okay, folks, good morning. Captain Paul here. I hope you guys are enjoying your Wednesday. I sure had a lot of fun last week with my grandkids down in Miami. I don't know what it is. I'm a sucker for South Beach, and I loved staying down there. Last week we talked about how long it would take you to actually learn how to drive your trawler after you bought it. But today, let's really, this is really for you beginners and guys out there just looking for your boats and really know the difference between a naturally aspirated and a turbocharged or supercharged engine, because your Detroits are all pretty much supercharged, not turbocharged. So that's why I say it that way. Anyway, I'll give you a little background on me. I was born in 1962. I lived in Las Vegas. Most of my life. That's where I spent most of my youth, and that's where I went to high school, and all that stuff. And then after that, I went to Phoenix and went to UTI, Universal Technical Institute, where I learned how to do diesel mechanics, and that's what I got a degree in diesel mechanics. Now, did I like it? Did I do that? Did I pursue that as a life career? No, I didn't. But it gives me a little bit of background in it, and a little bit of clout saying that I know a little bit about what I'm talking about, because you guys have seen in the past here where I'll pull the valve covers on these engines and actually adjust my own valves or run the rack or whatever I got to do for the 1,000-hour service. So that's why I'm saying that, so you guys get a little bit of history and know who I am and where I came from. Anyway, today we're down here in the engine room, and today I want to really talk about the killers of these engines, what you can do to prevent that, how you can save some money by preventing that, what's the difference between a naturally aspirated engine and a turbocharged engine. So let's get going here today, and let's give you a little tour of my engine room, especially for you guys that haven't been in one of these boats. Okay, so one thing I want to point out here is that I'm in a 44-foot Marine Trader trawler. I've pulled all of my floorboards up this morning, getting ready to do this video. And I just wanted to show you, I have plenty of room to get around the engines. I can go all the way, I can get on this side of the engine. I can go over here. I can work on this side of the engine. But it really takes that 44-footer to really get into that. The 40-foot and unders, you don't have the luxury of being able to work on the other side of that motor. Just something I wanted to show you real quick, especially you guys that are looking, especially some of you bigger guys, you want to try and get into that 36-foot trawler. And they're great, that's what Loop Princess was, but I can tell you right now, working on this outboard side of the engine was absolutely miserable. I mean, it's all by braille. You just can feel what you're doing and you do it. And at the price of mechanics today, a mechanic out here today is probably close to $200 an hour. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. We're also going to talk about, naturally aspirated versus turbocharged engine, what the cost would be to run one of these engines versus the same thing in a turbocharged version. So this is a 120 horsepower Lehman engine. It's naturally aspirated. So anytime you guys are looking at your ads or anything like that, and you see naturally NA after the engines, that means they're naturally aspirated. They don't require anything to turbo. And what that means, so this is a 120 horsepower Ford Lehman engine right here. If I threw a turbocharger on this engine, I can get as much as, let's say, almost 300 horsepower out of this same engine. Well, if just common sense right there will tell you, if I take this same engine and I've got to take it and I'm at normally aspirated, it'll produce 120 horsepower, but then I'm asking it to produce almost 300 horsepower. What do you think the guts of the inside of this engine will happen to the inside of this engine? Will it last as long as one that's naturally aspirated? The answer is no, it won't. So the number one killer, and I see this so often, it's ridiculous how often I see this, is, especially you guys getting your boats ready for America's Great Loop and stuff like that. One of the greatest things that you can do for, I don't care if it's turbocharged or if it's naturally aspirated, is go through your cooling system. You can see right here, this is my cooler. This is an oil cooler right here. But let's start over here in the front of the boat right here, and let's talk about this pump right here, because this is probably one of the most important pumps on any engine. I don't care if it's turbocharged. I don't care if it's naturally aspirated. This is your main, or what they call the raw water pump. So that has a hose right here, and that hose comes up to the pump, and that's bringing seawater into the engine. And what it does is then it comes through here, and it comes, so that this is my raw water hose that comes around here. It goes right up in here into the pump, and then after it comes out of the pump, it starts right here, and it goes into this oil cooler right here. So this is seawater running across this, and this is one of the ways that keeps the engine oil clean. Now, some people will take these off of here on a Ford Lehman and go get them cleaned and repaired. But if you call Brian over at American Diesel, he'll tell you just to replace these after X amount of hours. I think one is 1,500 and the other 1,600. I just do mine right around 1,400 hours. It makes it much easier. Matter of fact, I'm getting close on these ones right here, because right here is 4,682 hours. I've got over 5,000 hours on this engine now, so I'm probably getting down to the back side of when I'd have to change out this cooler right here. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So anyway, you follow this line right down here, and then it's going to come back here. This is the main heat exchanger right here. This is the main cooler for the engine. So you have antifreeze, and you would have raw water running through this right here. And to maintain this, I have these caps right here. I'm going to show you this side on this engine right here because it's a little bit easier. But I have my zinc right here. I have my cap right here. I have this on both sides. So what I can do, especially on a good, let's say 1,000-hour inspection here, I would pull both of these caps off right here. I would change out my zincs. Probably my zincs are probably about every oil change I change those zincs out. But on this one, if I'm doing a 1,000-hour service, I'm pulling these caps off. I'm inspecting there if I saw a lot of blockage or anything like that. More than likely, if it's a Ford Lehman, I'm going to replace this cooler right here. Last time I checked, these coolers were right under $1,000 for this cooler right here. But the reason I'm talking to you right here about this one is, so this one is my oil cooler right here. Okay, so this line right here comes into the main cooler right here, and then it comes out of here, and then it goes into this cooler right here, and this is my transmission cooler. And you can see I've got my hours marked on it as well, because this is one that I'd have to change. Like I said, about every 1,500 hours, I should be changing these out. I do not take these out and have them cleaned or fixed. I just replace them. On the Ford Lehmans, they're not, like I said before, it's not that horribly expensive. Last time I checked, this cooler right here, I believe was about $800 just for this cooler right here. These coolers right here, pre-COVID, they were $125. After COVID, I think they're $200. The last ones I bought were like $225. I always carry a spare one of these, oil and a transmission cooler in the boat. I have one for this one. Here in the next, probably this year, I'll go ahead and buy new coolers for this boat, just because I'm getting close to that 500-hour mark. I don't plan on putting 500 more hours on Southern Estate, but you never know, it could happen if we take it over to Mexico and something like that. This is right here. This is the exhaust elbow right here, and then this is your exhaust hose right here. A lot of people, especially on these older trawlers, they don't replace this hose right here, and it has to be replaced. If you got a 40-year-old trawler, that has to be replaced because it's already it's past its life. About 20 years is what you can get out of one of these hoses. So on Southern Estate, we were kind of lucky because the guy had gone through the complete cooling system and replaced everything. So the number one thing, like I said, I'll repeat this over and again, that you can do to any engine before you left on America's Great Loop or any big boating trip is go through your cooling system. Make sure all your parts are up to date, everything is current on your cooling system, and you're less likely to have any major problems, because keeping the engine cool, I don't care if it's turbocharged or naturally aspirated engine, keeping it cool is the number one thing that you can do to help yourself save money and just a good maintenance practice. Now, let's talk about real quick what it costs to service a naturally aspirated engine versus a turbocharged engine. I think the oil changes are pretty close to the same, because on this one right here, like when I go to change the oil on one of these Ford Lehmans right here, I hold a little over 3 gallons of oil. I have one fuel filter, I have one oil filter, and then I have one Raycor filter, and then about 4 gallons of oil. Transmission fluid. Whenever I actually change my transmission fluid more than I change my engine oil, actually. I don't know why, but I do. On the engines right here, I personally change my oil when I'm running the engines. That means, like if I was on America's Great Loop, I'd change them between 2 and 250. This boat right here doesn't burn any oil Never really has, especially now I've got these engines seated really, really well. It just hasn't in the last few oil changes. Right now I have about 150 hours on this oil change right here, and 0 oil. They haven't burned any oil, and that's after about 6,000. Yeah, this engine has almost 6,000 hours on it now, and this one has a little over 6,000 hours on it now. And they still don't burn any oil today. Another thing that a tall tale sign when you guys are looking at boats is, see all like these lines right here. I'll replace all these lines whenever I buy a boat, just because I don't like, if this has got rust on it or anything like that. I just want to make sure that all these lines are good. These are all my cooler lines, transmission lines right here. And I just make sure that they're all in, I just like replace them because it's easy for me to go to to American Diesel and call Brian and say, hey, I need new lines for this. And then he'll send them out to me, and then I replace them. And it makes the engine room look so much nicer and cleaner. It just really, really cleans up an engine. It's a good way to tell somebody that does good maintenance. So these are my oil lines right here. That's for the oil, cooler right here, and then this is for the transmission right here. These are my transmission lines, and that goes into the cooler right here. So an oil change on one of these engines right here costs about $300, a little bit less than $300 by the time you go buy your oil, buy all your filters. I put an additive in there. I put Lucas in my engines. That's about $30. The oil's about right under $100. Then all my filters are about another $100, and with my ray cores and everything like that, right under $100, and so it costs about $300, maybe just a little tad under that for just the parts for that. If you guys are paying somebody to do it, it's probably at least a few hours labor, so you're probably looking at about $400 an engine. Do it yourself, you're looking at that's just labor. So about 400 plus another 300. So you're looking at not right under $1,000 to change the oil in one of these per engine. So if you have 2 engines, it's $2,000. If you have 1 engine, it's about $1,000. A little bit less than that with labor. If you do it yourself, again, it's about $600 for both engines, $300 for 1 engine. So to go through the cooling system on one of these, what would it cost to go through a cooling system on an NA motor, naturally aspirated Ford Lehman motor? So first thing I would do is I'd replace this raw water pump right here. And then I have to, when I buy one of these, I replace these coolers. That's the first thing I do is replace these 2 coolers right here, the transmission cooler and the oil cooler right here. Those are the first, unless they have the hours and the record showing me the exact hours on those, and I know exactly when it was changed, I'll change them. This is my 3rd boat with Lehman's in it, so I know them pretty well. And like I said, you guys know, I talked about it a few minutes before, that I have a little background in diesel mechanics, so it's no problem for me to change these out at all. I've even run the racks on these, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So on the cooling system, you start with your raw water pump. You got to make sure this is where your impeller's at. So inside this housing right here, there's an impeller, and you'll hear about that. That needs to be changed out about every, some people will change them out every season. I do mine about every 2 seasons. The rubbers are actually pretty good. What will cause these things to fail, if you picked something up and got through your strainer, that could take it out. But generally about every 2nd season, I'll put a new impeller in here, and then I'll keep an eye on, see this drip right here? That right there, if I start to see a green or anything like that, or if this is leaking any type of seawater, that would be important for me to either replace that pump or rebuild it or fix it or whatever I need to do. So that's a number one. That pump right there on my last boat, I ended up replacing those. It was about $600 per pump, 2 engines, $1,200. That's just the parts. So you have your raw water pump here, you have your coolers, this cooler right here, then you have your radiator caps. Before I left this season, and I know this sounds a little cheesy, but I put brand new radiator caps on the boat. I called Brian over at American Diesel and said, hey, this is something that's inexpensive. Why don't you go ahead and send me 2 brand new radiator caps before I leave for the Bahamas, and then I'll keep my old ones as spare, because a stupid little radiator cap that costs $12 can really ruin your day. So you have your reservoir up here. What this is right here, what this reservoir does right here, that holds antifreeze, because your engine block and everything is all cooled with antifreeze, just like in a car or anything like that. And then the raw water from the ocean comes in, and that's what cools what cools it. So there's a little pipes that run through these things right here, and that's what the oil runs through, and then the seawater runs on the outside of it. Same thing with this cooler right here. And no, so I've got inspection plates right here. I just pull that bolt off right here. I can pull the end off here, and if I see any clogging or anything like that, I would go ahead and address it at that time. So on my 1,000-hour service, whenever you guys hear us say, hey, has the boat had a 1,000-hour service? That's a little more intense than just an oil change. That's pulling these valve covers off. That's adjusting your valves on your engine here. I'll show you a couple pictures here of me doing that. And then checking to make sure all the oil, everything looks good underneath this valve cover right here. And then going through, pulling all of these off and inspecting your entire cooling system. If these were ready to be changed, you would do that at your 1,000-hour, or I do mine right at the hours that they need to be changed. So it'd be between my, it'd be right at 1,500 hours. Those would get changed right there. So a 1,000-hour service. And what can you expect to pay on a naturally aspirated engine? You can expect to pay around $1,500 for a complete 1,000-hour service. Turbocharge, it's going to be about it's 4 times is what I always say on turbocharged engines. It costs about 4 times more to own a turbocharged engine versus a naturally aspirated. So that's something you got to think about when you're looking at your boats. Do I want that big horsepower comes at a price, just like anything else. And if you want these engines to produce more horsepower, and that's what you need, they're actually easier to drive too. Don't kid yourself. A boat with a lot of horsepower is much easier to drive than a boat with less horsepower. It just is. So it's a good reason to do it. But in fairness, I do want you to understand that if you owning a turbocharged engine, owning a naturally aspirated engine, you guys that just a perfect example. The Cummins, the Nordic tugboat we just sold, he went through the complete cooling system on that one, and I think it was right at $7,000 per engine. To do this one right here, you'd be about half that, and that's just parts. That's not labor, because on a turbocharged engine, now you get into aftercoolers. And those aftercoolers, I know on the Cummins it was remanufactured was $3,500. I think new was like $4,500. He couldn't get a new one, so he just went with the remanufactured. And what they do is they just go through, recore them, and rebuild them and get them back to new. And those need to be gone through every 1,000 hours, especially on your turbocharged engines. And that's why it gets very expensive owning a turbocharged engine very quickly if one's maintained correctly, and you can't recoup that money. A lot of people will say, in the boating industry, maintenance is maintenance on a boat, and it costs money to go across the water. It just does. And if you think you're going to buy a boat and then you're going to have to let's say, stick $10,000 in your motor, you're not going to recoup that $10,000. That $10,000 is gone. That's just normal maintenance that should have been done on the boat before you bought it. And if you bought one that's less than perfectly maintained and you have to get it up to par, it can easily, Loop Princess as a perfect example. Even this boat right here, I probably stuck well in excess of over, probably right around $2,500 an engine, and that's just buying parts. I would say in the life that I've owned this boat, which is only 2 years, I've probably stuck right at probably close to $10,000 in these 2 engines right here. But this, like this season, we put a new starter motor on this engine right here. I've had to go through the alternators. Loop Princess was a little bit more money because I had to go through, replace raw water pumps. I had to replace all of these hoses, I had the risers. I had to do everything on Loop Princess, so it was quite a bit more expensive. Just doing Loop Princess, just that engine room alone, I put over $10,000 into those 2 engines. These on Southern Estate here, it was much less because the previous owner, he had replaced the raw water pumps. All I've done on this one is replace these hoses and these lines right here, and then just routine maintenance, and it's 1,000-hour service. So and on Loop Princess, I had to do everything on that one, which when you go completely through the cooling system, again, it was probably about $3,500 per engine. So we're gonna back up here just a second, because I really want to talk about the complete cooling system, so you guys know. So on your boat, you'll have a water pump. Let's see if I can get over here to the water pump. So my water pump is on just like any other car or vehicle. This is my water pump right here. It has a belt, so you want to make sure you're inspecting that belt all the time. And then that has to be in good working order. Now those will have a little weep hole on them. And so if you're leaking anything out of that weep hole, that's a good sign. You're not going to rebuild it. You're just going to pull it off and replace it. I do not replace those unless they're leaking out of that weep hole. Then I'll replace it. And you usually get enough time out of something like that. You've got time once it starts leaking out of that weep hole to get it replaced. So that's just an indicator that needs to be done. So then you have and that runs the antifreeze through the block of the engine and through all of these coolers and keeps everything cool inside the engine. So that's what's running the antifreeze, goes up through so from your water pump, you've got your, this is my reservoir for my cooling. So this is antifreeze inside here. Then I go to a thermostat on these Ford Lehmans here. I like to run 180 thermostats. I don't like my engines to be too cool, and I don't want them to be too hot. Diesel engines you got to keep them warm. You got to keep them heated up. And so 180 thermostats seem to work really well on these Ford Lehmans. It seems like where everybody runs their engines, 180, 190, somewhere around there. So you got to make sure in your cooling system, you got to make sure your thermostat's up to date, all of your cooling system, the whole cooling system. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, it's a really good place to spend money and time and really understanding it on your boat, because once you do, it'll make your life so much easier. So I want to talk about real quick, now we talked about how important your cooling system is on your boat, and how you can save some money by just maintaining that and keeping it properly maintained is probably one of the simplest things you can do. It's not horribly expensive to do it right now, and you're going to do it. If you buy an old trawler like this and you go out on America's Great Loop and you have cooling problems on your boat, you didn't do your homework. Because that's just a no-no. You shouldn't have it. You should have already gone through that complete system before you ever left on America's Great Loop or any great adventure, especially you guys going over the Bahamas or something like that, because it's the single biggest wrecker of any trip, and it's probably one of the easiest things to maintain on the boat. So let's talk about my favorite engines right here. So on my NAs, and I want to hear you guys' comments about these too. On my NAs, I'm going to go with my Ford Lehmans. I've had 3 boats with them now, had a lot of success with them. I know them pretty well. They're pretty easy for me to maintain. But if I was building a world cruiser, and what I mean by that is if I was building something that I had was taking around the world, I would probably go with a single 3208, and that'll blow a lot of people's mind. Why would you say that? Parts. So you see a cat dealer on just about every single corner, and I would only go with a naturally aspirated, would not go with a turbocharged 3208, just 2 different beasts altogether. And the difference is because on a 3208 turbocharged, it's about a 5,000 mile motor. On a naturally aspirated, it's about a 20,000 hour motor. So that's the huge difference on that. And what did I get? 210 horsepower out of one of those. So it's got plenty of horsepower to lug along at my 6-7 knots, if that's the way I had to go. And I've got a cat dealer on every single corner. So I want to hear your guys' comment on that. What do you guys think about that? That might blow some of your guys' mind, actually. But that's the reason for that. But now if I'm going turbocharged, and this is probably going to be my sleeper here, I'm going to go with Yanmars. I run a lot of boats with Yanmars. The company boats that we run right now all have Yanmars. You can get 20,000 hours out of a turbocharged Yanmar, but now that's going through the coolers. That's staying up with the maintenance of one of those. But you know, that's not uncommon. Then my next one on turbocharge is probably the Cummins. It's just Cummins has always been one of my favorite motors. And a little back history real quick, and I'm going to make this super quick for you guys. So the Detroit Diesel was always built, it was like that school bus, city bus type driving. So on it hard, off, on it hard, off, on it hard, off. Caterpillars, forklifts, heavy equipment, big things where it just needs to run that continuous duty, and that's what they were built for. The 3208 in particular was built for a you know, just a continuous. It was built for tanks actually, and they were just throwaway motors, and they stick turbochargers on them, and they were made to be pulled out real quick and then put new ones in real quick. And that's what they originally were designed for, as a military application. And then they brought them into the Marine, and they brought them into everything else. Great motors, even the 3116, 3126s. I'm not afraid of cats just because the great parts. Next week, in next week's video, we're going to talk about ways that you can save money and some stuff that you guys can do and pre-do it before you buy your boat, and know what you're doing before you buy that boat. We're going to talk about that. We're going to come back down into the engine room and go over a few other things. It won't be so much, we won't be talking about the cooling system and stuff like that. We'll be talking about other maintenance down here and stuff that you guys can do. So getting back to this week's video, you know, my sleeper engine. You guys might think I'm crazy for this, and I definitely want to hear your comments. So we have my two favorite naturally aspirated motors are my Ford Lehmans and my 3208 Cat. Big reason for that, somebody will say, well, how come you didn't pick the Perkins? Perkins is a little bit more complicated because of the parts situation. They're not as easy to get the parts for. Don't ask me why. Because I think American Diesel, you know, I can go call Brian over there and say, hey, I need this and this, and I got it. There's a Cat dealer on every single dealership, on every single corner, but there's not a Perkins dealership on every corner, even though they're great engines, same as the Lehmans. You know, I think they get a little bit actually better fuel mileage than the Lehmans, believe it or not, because I've run with a couple of them on America's Great Lube. It seemed like they got just a tad bit better fuel mileage. So nothing knocking your Perkins, guys, but it just doesn't make my list because parts availability. That's the biggest reason right there. So and again, on my turbocharged engine, you know, Yanmars, you got Yanmar dealers all over the place, worldwide. I love those engines. Now on my big, you know, if I'm going a big boat, you know, I'm going to go with some Mans, some German-made Mans. Those are just, they're beautiful engines. Okay, but we're back here on our 40-year-old trawler type engines. So Cummins, Yanmars, and then my sleeper. And this again might hurt some feelings here, and I want to hear your comments. Is probably the Hino, actually, because you know, that's a great little engine. It was built, Lexus built that engine, and it's supposedly just a good engine. I want to hear anybody I've ever heard that ran the Hinos. They're fairly simple to get parts for. They're pretty basic motor, even their turbocharged version of them, and you know, I've just never heard anybody complain about those Hino diesels. I have run them in a few Bayliners and a couple of other boats, and I've never had any problems with them. You know, I like Volvos. I've run Volvos, but the problem with why Volvo wouldn't even make my probably top 5 list is just, again, availability, mechanics. If a Volvo goes out on me, I've got to get a Volvo mechanic, and they're just getting harder and harder to find. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end this week's video because, you know, I don't want to be sitting here rambling on, and I want to hear your guys' comments on why, you know, what engine you think, especially if you run one of these engines. I want to hear why. Let's give everybody a small explanation of why you like that particular engine and why you run that engine, and how it works for you. Because, you know, all diesel engines, all they need is air, fuel. And that's it. Once you get air and fuel to them, and you know, all your injectors are good and your pumps are good and stuff like that, they're going to run no matter what. It's just a matter of how you get there. Because, you know, give me a good set of John Deere engines too. Those are really good marine engines. But again, they're up there in the higher end boats. Like you'll see those in some Flemings, not Flemings, sorry, Nordhavens will run John Deere's. And then we ran those in a couple of shrimp boats that I used to operate and work on a long time ago. So I know the John Deere engines pretty well, and that's a good engine too also. But just real quick, a recap on it. My naturally aspirated are my Ford Lehmans and my 3208 Cat. My turbocharged are my Yanmars, then Cummins, and then my sleeper is is my Hinos. Even though there's a lot of great engines out there, guys, I don't want anybody to be scared about their engines. Just make sure you go through your cooling systems and know your engines well. Anyway, Paul Bates, peace out. Make sure you guys have a great week. And again, next week we're going to come back down into the engine room, and I'm going to show you guys how, especially you guys out there looking for boats, how to save a little bit of money and do some of the pre-buy stuff before you ever buy a boat, or if you guys are in the market to be buying a boat, and go through the procedures of what that would look like before you made a purchase of a boat. So it's pretty cool stuff. Anyway, peace out. Remember, hit that like and subscribe, share it with your friends, and I do appreciate the support on YouTube. Thank you guys so much. Bye.